Seydou, good to have you in the studio.
Thanks for having me.
There's always this figure being thrown around between 650 to 680 million Africans no access to electricity. Our central is to actually us to think outside the box right now and think off-grid solutions.
Well, that's actually one of the key problems that we're trying to attest to as a power management company. So this is a concrete problem where we can bring solutions using renewables. I think one of the greatest way of answering to this massive demand is really focusing on renewable, access to renewable and off-grid solutions.
Right. The one thing that's actually always fascinating is, yes, on one hand you have this talk about renewables, it's good for the environment and the future of the planet. And on the other, you have basic capitalism. Someone is going to tell you the cost of me changing the grid as it stands right now to incorporate solar energy and wind energy is astronomical, and I just don't have that money. How do we draw the line here? And I'm not speaking like I'm an engineer because I'm very oblivious. I just read this stuff.
Well, from a business perspective, there's one clear fact. You know, when we look at Africa, the cheapest energy source is renewable, so solar in particular. Yeah. So we're talking about a cost by the kilowatt hour of approximately 0.55 rand cents versus the levelized cost of energy around 1 rand 15 or 1 rand 59. Sorry. So it's a no-brainer whenever we're talking about reducing the cost of energy to including renewables in the supply mix. Now, one thing about renewable is the fact that it's intermittent, right? In particular, solar. So one of the
What do you mean by intermittent here?
Well, you have energy when the sun is out. So what do you do when there's no more sun? So that's where one of the recommendations that we bring is the inclusion of storage to that mix. And basically storage with a low uptime would further help to decrease your cost. And overall, what we see is that microgrids are a very efficient solution for Africa.
Now, I remember I did fail my physics back in the day for my O levels, but I remember something around energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Am I right?
Well, it depends from which angle you come
from.
Okay,
I clearly failed. I clearly failed. But storage is a problem. And the reason why I bring that up is the cost of storing energy is so astronomical in some generating or generation programs that, again, solar here, that's some baggage that it actually comes with because in the night, there's no sun, and that's where you need the solar the batteries, rather, to store the energy. And is it time to actually see some reforms in this particular perspective?
So you have multiple technologies to store energy, right? So flow vanadium, you have some thermal solar, you have as well some pumped hydroelectricity, and the one that we see gaining a lot of momentum is lithium-ion. So it's a technology that you find in your mobile phones, but also particularly in electrical vehicle. So the massive increase of electric vehicle is actually driving significantly the price down for lithium-ion. So we're seeing actually an opportunity to introduce or to accelerate the use of lithium-ion. And the cost, for a stat, for instance, is that within the last 10 years, the cost of lithium-ion has dropped something around 90%.
Right. I was just going through here the first law of thermodynamics. Energy states that it can neither be created nor destroyed, so maybe I never failed ultimately. Okay, let's talk about the need for structural reform, and I'm talking here from the fiscal end of things. I think it was India that had an open environment if you are importing solar panels, and some countries have kind of adopted this. Rwanda, another good example, hardly any, some subsidies even to mention. For a continent that is grappling with the load shedding right now, I'm even bringing in South Africa here, isn't this a way out? Less taxation, more subsidies on solar panels?
Mhm. Our position is that definitely there is space for renewable in the energy mix, right? So that's part of the solution. I'm not saying that that's the only option, but it's clearly part of the solution. So from a regulatory standpoint, governments and stakeholders could definitely provide an enabling environment around increasing the share of renewable in the grid. And one way, is clearly looking at, tax reforms. Another way is looking at regulatory changes that would allow feed-in, for instance. So basically being able to export to the grid. And from that perspective, we see that business could be an essential contributor to alleviating the issues that we're seeing with the electricity crisis right now.
Seydou, I'm going to put you on the spot. If you were Mr. Pakamani Hadebe at ESCOM, what would you do different?
That's a tough one, but definitely look at integration of renewable on the South African electricity grid.
But you're already grappling with generation. How can you then think about renewables?
More storage. The idea is really, the point here is really to look at it in a constructive and collaborative way. One good example is the UK. So all the stakeholders got together and said, let's look at the way to reduce the cost of energy for the end users. And this included a lot of coordination, including adding electricity from behind the grid. So basically electricity that you and I could just generate on the rooftop of our houses. How can you gather all that energy? How could you coordinate every single source that is available to make sure that you use it when necessary and reduce the cost?
But isn't there a debate around what happens to the mini-grids? Many of the mini-grids are in the rural side, the countryside of much of sub-Saharan Africa. What happens to the entire primary grid when it gets to that part of the countryside, to the rurals? What happens to it then? Do you integrate it? Or if it was a credit that was borrowed to make sure that this grid gets there, do you pay them back? What happens then?
I think one of the initial elements to think about is that mini-grid and microgrid actually contribute to delaying some of the capex investment that utilities and municipalities have to make. Right now, one of the critical problems that we have on the grid is the aging infrastructure, particularly on transmission and distribution. So that's for one. The second element is that mini-grids are not only for off-grid rural electrification. As we speak, we have a lot of commercial and industrial sites that are run through mini-grids, and we have significant reductions on the cost of energy that they're using. So I believe that it's important to have a conjunction of, number one, case by case, depending on the country, but there is a benefit clearly that the collaboration between the independent producers and mini-grid owners and the utility have to have in order to understand and use better that electricity.
Bon, merci beaucoup, Seydou.
Merci.
Many thanks, Seydou. That was Seydou Kane, who is the MD of Eaton, South Africa.